She stood at the far end of the hallway holding the small cardboard box that carried the last traces of her career, an old stethoscope with peeling rubber, a folded badge she no longer had permission to wear, and a single thank you card from a child whose life she had once helped save. The fluorescent lights above flickered in that tired, uneven way hospitals often did at the end of a long night. But this night was different. It was her last shift, her final minutes in a place that had been her identity more than her home. Lena had never imagined the end would feel like this, quiet, cold, and humiliating. Her dismissal had been whispered to her behind a closed door only hours ago, delivered with stiff professionalism by administrators who saw budgets instead of human beings. A mistake she had not caused, a shortage she had warned them about for months, and a patient's angry family looking for someone to blame. Those were the ingredients of her downfall. She felt as though someone had carved a hollow inside her chest. She had given 15 years of her life to this hospital, and all they gave back was a form to sign and a guard who stood a few steps behind, pretending not to stare. As she walked toward the exit, the hallway seemed unnaturally long, as if the building itself wanted to stretch out her humiliation for just a few seconds more. Nurses who had worked beside her for years avoided her eyes, not because they didn't care, but because they did. They didn't know how to handle the shame hovering around her like a dark cloak, shame she hadn't earned. At the double doors near the main entrance, a gust of early morning wind slipped through the opening and chilled her face. She paused, looking back one last time. She remembered the first day she wore her scrubs here, bright, hopeful, confident. She could still feel the ache of that young ambition buried somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion. She wondered if that version of herself would even recognize her now. She stepped outside, and the world felt strangely vast. The sky was washed in a pale pre-dawn blue, and the scent of rain lingered in the air as if the clouds had cried for her when she no longer could. She hugged the cardboard box tighter to her chest, unsure what to do next, unsure what she was now, stripped of the identity she had lived in for so long. Then she heard it, first a distant vibration in the air, then a deep rumble that slowly grew louder. She frowned, looking up as the wind shifted sharply, carrying a sound that seemed too massive for the quiet morning. For a moment she thought the world was collapsing into the chaos she felt inside herself. The ground trembled. A shadow swept across the parking lot, and then another. She turned, her breath catching as two helicopters, military, heavy, and unmistakably urgent, descended toward the hospital grounds. Dust spiraled upward, loose gravel rattled, and the cardboard box nearly slipped from her grip. The hospital staff who moments earlier pretended not to see her now stood frozen, shielding their faces from the whipping wind, staring toward the landing pads. Before she could step aside, the first helicopter door slid open. A man jumped out, helmet still on, vest still strapped, urgency radiating from him so intensely it felt like a physical force. His eyes locked on her instantly, as though he had been searching for only one person. He began running straight toward her. "Ma'am," his voice was strained but steady, "we need you, right now." The words lodged in her chest. For a moment she wondered if she had misheard him, or if the universe was playing some cruel joke, offering her what she wanted most only after it had been taken away. But he reached her, breathing hard, eyes wide, and something in his expression made her throat tighten. This wasn't routine, this wasn't protocol, this was desperation. Another soldier jumped out of the second helicopter, shouting something over the roar. Lena couldn't make out the words, but she recognized the fear in their posture, the urgency in the way they scanned the area, searching for answers. Her palms tingled, her heart clawed at her chest. She felt the instinct rise within her, the instinct she thought had been buried beneath humiliation and loss. The instinct of a nurse who had spent her entire life running toward emergencies, not away from them. But she wasn't a nurse anymore. She was a woman no longer employed, no longer trusted by her own hospital, no longer welcome inside the building behind her. She swallowed hard. I don't work here anymore. The soldier shook his head sharply. Doesn't matter. We were told to find you, only her. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She felt the world narrowing into a thin line between who she used to be and who she might still be, if someone somewhere still believed in her. Behind them, the hospital doors burst open as administrators and staff rushed out, their faces pale with shock. They weren't running toward Lena. They were running toward the helicopters, toward the crisis that had just landed on their doorstep. But the soldiers weren't looking at any of them. They were looking only at her. She felt her heart tremble. For the first time in hours, she felt alive again. The soldier's breath clouded in the cold morning air as he stepped closer, lowering his voice as though the request itself carried weight too heavy to shout into the wind. We have critical casualties inbound. Our medic was injured during the extraction. We were told you could handle trauma under impossible pressure. Impossible pressure. Lena almost laughed. Her entire life had been impossible pressure. But the administrators behind her were already whispering, their eyes darting between her and the aircraft, as if the universe itself had forgotten. She was no longer one of them. The second helicopter touched down, its rotors slowing. The dust settled into a thin veil across the asphalt, and through it Lena saw two stretchers inside, one soldier, conscious but fading, another motionless. She couldn't see their injuries clearly, but she didn't need to. She could feel the severity in the air, in the way the flight crew moved with that tight, controlled panic only experienced professionals ever showed. Her fingers twitched, her heart beat in the familiar rhythm of readiness. She felt the weight of her old stethoscope pressing through the cardboard box, like a reminder of who she'd been meant to be. The hospital director rushed forward, smoothing his suit jacket and trying to regain control of a situation far larger than his authority. "Excuse me," he barked, addressing the soldiers. "This woman is no longer employed here. We have protocols, sir." The soldier cut him off, his voice steady but edged with steel. "Protocols don't matter when we have men dying." The director faltered, thrown off balance by the directness of the statement. He glanced at Lena, a flicker of discomfort passing through his eyes, not empathy but fear, fear that she might step back into relevance, fear that the woman they pushed out might suddenly be indispensable. For a moment, as the rotors slowed further and the cold wind faded, the world felt suspended. The hospital staff stood in a half-circle, unsure whether to offer help or distance themselves. Lena felt her throat tighten. She had been dismissed, accused, humiliated. She had no badge to scan, no authority to stand here, and yet 2 helicopters had crossed miles of sky searching for her. She swallowed. "Tell me what happened." The soldier exhaled with something like relief. "Explosion on the northern ridge. We were on a training exercise. We stabilized them the best we could, but our medic said your name before he passed out. He said you were the only one who could keep them alive." Lena didn't know who their medic was. She didn't know how he knew her, but she didn't question it. Life had always woven strange threads between strangers when moments mattered most. She stepped forward. The soldier glanced at her cardboard box. "You won't need any of that," he said softly. She let it fall to the ground. As she approached the helicopter, the scent of fuel, burned fabric, and coppery blood reached her. It was a smell she knew too well, a smell she had learned to steady herself against. She climbed in, her hands instinctively moving into the motions she had repeated thousands of times, checking pulses, assessing breathing, calculating triage decisions faster than rational thought could keep up. The conscious soldier's eyes fluttered open. They were bloodshot, rimmed with pain. He looked at her not with fear, but with trust. Trust that she would know what to do. Trust that she was the right person. She stabilized his airway, tightened a pressure bandage, adjusted his Roman 4, all while her mind moved at a pace that felt almost otherworldly. She had always been like this, her mind clearest in the moments that terrified others. The second soldier, the motionless one, stirred faintly as she checked his pulse again. Weak, thready, his skin cold, his injuries deep, Lena felt a tightness claw at her chest. He didn't have long. Behind her, the director tried again. She cannot do this, he insisted. She is not authorized to treat anyone in this facility. The soldier nearest him turned, eyes blazing. Then authorize her. I cannot. Lena didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She could hear every tremble in his voice, every ounce of fear beneath his authority. She knew he was not trying to protect patients. He was trying to protect himself from the possibility that firing her had been a mistake that would now be visible to the entire world. She spoke without looking away from the wounded soldier. If you try to stop me, he dies. The silence that followed was absolute. The director closed his mouth. The world shifted around her. Control moved away from the people who believed they owned it and into the hands of the one person they had tried to erase. She leaned close to the barely conscious soldier, her voice low but steady. Stay with me. I'm right here. Her fingers moved quickly, skillfully, fearlessly guided by instinct, training, and something deeper. Something inside her that had never been tied to a job title or badge. She didn't need the hospital. She needed only her hands, her mind, and the quiet promise she silently made to every patient she ever met, that she would not let them fight alone. The soldier gasped, a fragile breath, but a breath nonetheless. Lena felt something inside her ignite. This was who she had always been. And no one, not administrators, not paperwork, not a wrongful termination, could take that from her. The helicopter blades finally stilled, leaving a heavy quiet that made every heartbeat, every measured breath, painfully loud. Lena remained hunched over the wounded soldier, her hands moving with unwavering precision. She had no badge, no uniform, no official standing, yet everyone around her had fallen into a silent orbit, waiting for her direction. Her mind operated in overlapping layers, monitoring the soldier's blood pressure, assessing internal bleeding by touch, calculating oxygen saturation by instinct. She could feel his life pulling away from him in thin, invisible strands, and she fought to anchor each one back into his body. The soldier's chest rose shallowly beneath her palm, too shallow. She looked up, her eyes locking with the flight crew chief. I need a trauma cart, now. He hesitated, glancing uncertainly toward the hospital as if expecting resistance. But then he saw the look on her face, unyielding, calm, and carrying more command than any title ever could. He nodded and sprinted toward the entrance. Hospital staff parted for him like water. Something shifted then, something deeper than procedure or hierarchy. Nurses who had turned away from her earlier now stood watching, torn between admiration and guilt. A few stepped closer, unable to ignore the instinct she awakened in them, the instinct to help. The stretcher wheels squeaked as two young nurses pushed the trauma cart toward her. She noticed the way their hands shook, the way their breath hitched as they saw the soldier's condition. Without thinking, she placed a steadying hand on one of their arms. It's all right, she whispered. You're not alone. They nodded, anchoring themselves with her strength. She began directing them, not with authority, but with clarity. Someone handed her sterile gloves. Another adjusted the Roman 4 line. A third prepared blood transfusion tubing. The director hovered near the back of the crowd, his face tight with a mixture of dread and awe. Every movement Lena made, every decision flowing from her like water, created a quiet hum of unity around her. Staff members who moments earlier feared being associated with her now waited for her next instruction, as though she were the only lighthouse in a storm. When she lifted her hands, blood streaked the gloves. The gloves trembled slightly, not from fear, but from urgency. She applied pressure again. The soldier groaned faintly. She leaned over him, her voice low. I know you're tired. Stay with me anyway. The soldier's fingers twitched against the stretcher rail. The trauma cart's monitors beeped erratically. She saw the numbers dropping, her mind instantly mapping paths between what she had, what she needed, and what she absolutely had to improvise. Her heart beat once, twice, then settled into the steady rhythm of absolute focus. Start the transfusion, she said. Prepare for airway support. One of the younger nurses faltered, "But we aren't. You are," Lena said firmly, placing the oxygen mask over the soldier's face herself. "Right now, you are." A few steps away, a cluster of administrators stood whispering. She could hear fragments carried by the breeze, concerns about liability, rules, consequences. Words meant for boardrooms, not for battlefields. Words that had never saved a life. She ignored all of them. Her patient's pulse stuttered, her breath caught for half a second. "Come on," she murmured, "not yet." She applied more pressure, adjusted her angle, mentally tracing the path of the unseen injury. She felt the faintest shift beneath her fingertips, a sign that the bleeding had slowed. Hope flickered like a fragile flame. Then, abruptly, the soldier's body jolted. Alarm beeped sharply, too sharply. A soft gasp escaped one of the nurses. But Lena didn't flinch. "He's still here," she said calmly. "He's fighting." She needed to act quickly. She slid her hand beneath his jaw, checked his airway again, lifted his shoulder to reduce pressure on the wound. "Help me stabilize him," she said, and they did, all of them. A young resident applied clamps. Another adjusted the oxygen flow. A respiratory therapist hurried over with emergency equipment. It didn't matter who had hesitated moments earlier. Now they moved together as if connected by the same pulse. The world around them blurred into a tunnel of motion, breath, and determination. When the numbers on the monitor finally rose barely, but unmistakably, Lena felt her lungs expand fully for the first time since the helicopters arrived. A tiny spark of relief, but she knew it wasn't enough, not yet. The soldier needed surgery, stabilization, imaging, tools only the hospital could provide. Tools she was no longer allowed to use. She turned and found the director staring at her. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. This is highly irregular," he rasped almost to himself. She removed one bloodied glove and spoke with quiet intensity. "Let me save him." For the first time since dawn, the director had no words. Only the sight of a dying soldier, held on the thin boundary between life and death by a woman he had cast aside as disposable. The weight of reality pressed on him, and everyone saw it. He stepped back, defeated by truth. Lena placed both hands on the stretcher again. "We're moving him," she said, and no one dared to argue. The wheels of the stretcher rattled across the pavement as the team rushed toward the hospital entrance. Lena stayed at the soldier's side, one hand on his pulse, the other steadying the portable oxygen bag. The wind tugged at her hair. The sky brightened with the first hints of sunrise. And the hospital she had been expelled from only hours ago now depended entirely on the woman they no longer claimed. Inside the sliding doors, the fluorescent lights flickered again, this time as if incredulous at the shift in reality unfolding within the walls. Staff lining the corridor stepped out of the way, some stumbling back, others whispering her name under their breath. She didn't hear any of them. Her mind was only on the soldier slowly slipping between breaths. They veered into the emergency trauma bay. The room, once familiar, felt strangely foreign, as though it recognized her, but could not reconcile the fact that she had been removed from its rhythm. But she slipped back into it effortlessly, like a musician returning to an instrument she never should have been asked to set down. "Get me the crash kit," she said. It arrived instantly. She scanned the monitor's systolic dropping again. Oxygen still too low, internal bleeding worsening. Time was fracturing into smaller and smaller pieces. She leaned over him. "Not yet." She whispered again. "You're too close. Stay." His fingers twitched. It was enough. She began rapid interventions, each movement threading between instinct and memory. Nurses responded to her commands without question. A surgeon who had been called in rushed into the room and froze for a split second when he saw her. Not because he doubted her, but because he had never seen a nurse command a room like a storm. "Tell me what you need," he said. Lena told him. Within seconds he was working at her side, trusting her judgment over protocol, over hierarchy, over the fragile politics of the hospital. The director lingered in the doorway, his face unreadable. But when the surgeon asked for equipment that should have been prepared minutes ago, he stepped forward himself, handing it over with trembling hands. He didn't look at Lena, but the meaning was clear. He knew who had the authority now. When the soldier's breathing finally deepened slowly, unevenly, but unmistakably stronger, the entire room felt it. A collective exhale, a fragile victory, but then Lena's knees weakened slightly, not from exhaustion. From the weight of everything she had been holding inside, she steadied herself on the edge of the bed. She had saved lives under impossible pressure before, but never under the weight of being discarded, humiliated, and asked to return only because others were desperate. The surgeon met her eyes. You bought him time. Without you, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The soldier was stabilized enough for surgery. The team wheeled him toward their movements now confident, unified. Lena stepped away slowly, her hands still shaking with the aftershock of adrenaline. The hallway fell quiet around her. The director approached, the hospital board behind him. Their expressions were strained, some apologetic, some cautious, some calculating. "Lena," the director began, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "we may have acted too quickly. I'd like to discuss a no," she said, not harshly, but with steady finality. He blinked, startled. "I didn't save him for you," she continued. "I saved him because it's who I am, not because of this building, not because of a badge." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Lena stepped closer, not to intimidate, but to make sure there was no misunderstanding. "You didn't take my career from me. You only took my job." And then, before anyone could respond, a soldier approached, the one she had stabilized first, now conscious enough to sit in a wheelchair. He looked up at her, eyes raw with gratitude. "Ma'am," he whispered, voice thin. "You saved my brother. He told us about you. Said if we were ever hurt, find the nurse who didn't panic. The one who stayed even when everyone else left." Lena's breath caught. The medic, his brother, had known her, worked with her once, recognized her worth when her own hospital hadn't. The soldier reached for her hand. "Thank you." Tears stung her eyes, not from sorrow, but from the validation she didn't know she had needed so badly. She squeezed his hand gently. The director tried again. "We can reinstate you immediately, with back pay." With Lena turned to him, her expression calm. "No, I'm not coming back." Shock rippled through the hall. "Why?" he whispered. She glanced at the soldiers, then at the trauma bay behind her. "Because people who only value you when you're convenient don't deserve you when you're extraordinary." The soldiers exchanged looks, impressed, respectful. Lena stepped into the morning light outside the hospital. The helicopters were still there, engines cooling, waiting. The soldier who had first called out to her jogged over. "Ma'am, our commander wants to speak with you. Says he's got a position open. Says he wants someone who runs toward chaos with a clear mind." The wind picked up, lifting the corner of the cardboard box she had dropped earlier. She didn't look back at it. She walked toward the helicopter instead, not because she needed validation, because the world had just reminded her of who she had always been, a healer, a warrior in scrubs, a woman who didn't need permission to save a life. She stepped toward the aircraft, the sunrise catching her face with a gentle warmth, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt something rise in her chest, belonging, purpose, direction, and as the helicopter door opened for her, she realized she wasn't stepping away from her old life. She was stepping into the one she had always been meant for.